understanding concrete and pinholes will help minimize the risk of outgassing into any of your coatings. In last fortnight's episode, we discussed the importance of understanding different concrete slab conditions. So, if you haven't watched that yet, you can find the link in the description below. In today's episode, we'll be outlining exactly what pinholes are and how they are formed. So, let's get started. Pinholes are tiny holes formed in the concrete slab while it's being laid. They are often below the surface and only exposed once grinding has commenced. Generally, the softer and more porous the slab, the more pinholes you'll find. However, hard and dense concrete is not immune to this issue either. To make matters worse, strength and porosity can vary across a single concrete slab, meaning one end can be softer and more prone to pinholes than the other, most likely where the concrete has been most exposed to heat or over-prepped. We touched on this last week, but the best way to think of concrete is like a sponge. It's able to absorb and expel air and moisture. Concrete does this on a daily basis, where the slab heats up, all the air expands and usually breathes out the surface. Then, as the concrete cools, it draws air back in. Pinholes exaggerate this breathing, especially if there is a coating on top, which is why we see bubbles form over these holes. Pinholes are hard to see even after grinding and can cause nightmares when coating. As you might have guessed, bubbles form from the outgassing of a concrete slab. Outgassing is the slow escape of the pressurized air from the surface. The main reason behind outgassing is the rise in temperature from cold mornings to hot afternoons. This heating causes the air in the concrete to expand and thus blow out the concrete. Generally, slabs that are more porous tend to have the most issues, especially if applying your coating whilst the slab is still heating. Bubbles take away from how good the overall outcome of your application looks, which isn't ideal. There are a few different types of bubbles that can form depending on how far along the curing process is when the outgassing occurs. If the coating is still wet, bubbles will often just wet back in and flatten out. If the coating has started to cure, the bubbles will usually pop and leave a ring or a lump around the pinhole, commonly seen in the epoxy due to longer cure times. If the coating cures while the bubbles are still forming, it can freeze them in place, looking and sounding a bit like bubble wrap. This is most often seen in top coats due to the quicker cure times. Environmental conditions have a significant impact on application, with the biggest reason for pinholes and outgassing being due to the rise in temperatures. While this outgassing and breathing is at its worst and the bubble risk is at its highest during the summer months, a common misconception is that concrete remains cooler in winter due to the lower temperatures. During winter, especially in the Australian climate, we can start our days as low or lower than 0 degrees, and by lunchtime, on average, we can reach up to 25 degrees. Even though it isn't as hot as a scorching summer's day, the concrete has still heated up 20 to 25 degrees in a short span of time. Then, as the sun passes the hottest point of the day, it cools down for the nighttime and repeats again the next day. No matter what time of day it is important to try and avoid direct exposure to sunlight as much as possible. The heat from the sun can supercharge the air and moisture expansion, which can lead to lines of bubbles where the sun's rays have been shining through a window. However, this is easier said than done when working outside, right? The best way to combat this is by working after the hottest part of the day or finishing before the sun starts to heat the concrete. While this varies city to city, it's usually between the hours of 3 p.m. and 7 a.m. Where possible, using shade or temperature control methods to keep the temperature of the slab and air the same can also help. If dramatic weather events are predicted, such as a heat wave, rescheduling the application may be the safest option. While they can be a nightmare to deal with, understanding concrete and pinholes will help minimize the risk of outgassing into any of your coatings. Knowledge is key in this industry. If you found this video helpful, subscribe to our channel below to follow along with the rest of the series. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.